Hello and welcome to another session of Wednesdays in the Word. I am Pastor Autry, and we're going to look at our next segment in this series entitled A Conversation About the Chosen. We're going to look at season 1, episode 8, where Jesus says to the Samaritan woman, "I am He." And so if you hadn't had a chance to check out the episode, go ahead and pause the video. There's a link to that episode in the description box. Check it out, and then jump back in once you finish checking out the episode. And so in this video, we want to raise the question, what did Jesus mean by "I am He" or being the Christ?
I say if you knew who I am, you'd be asking me for a drink.
Really?
And I would give you living water.
Would. Except that you have nothing to draw water with, and this is a deep well. Besides, what do you need from me if you have your own supply of living water?
Long story.
But Jewish water is better than Samaritan water.
That's not what I said.
Are you a better man than our ancestor Jacob, who dug this well? Your water is better than his?
I know Jacob. And everyone who drinks this water will thirst again. But whoever drinks the water that I give him will never be thirsty again.
Wouldn't that be nice?
The water I give will become in a person a spring of water welling up to eternal life.
Really?
Yes, really.
Prove it.
First, go and call your husband and come back. I will show you both.
I don't have a husband.
You are right. You've had 5 husbands. And the man you're living with now is not your husband.
Oh, I see. You're a prophet. You're here to preach at me.
No.
Usually the one good thing about coming here alone is I can escape being condemned.
I'm not here to condemn you.
I've made mistakes. Too many. But it's men like you who have made it impossible for me to do anything about it.
God is spirit. And the time is coming and is now here that it won't matter where you worship, but only that you do it in spirit and truth. Heart and mind, that is the kind of worshiper he's looking for. It won't matter where you're from or what you've done. Do you believe what I'm telling you?
Until the Messiah comes and explains everything and sorts this mess out, including me, I don't trust in anyone.
You're wrong when you say that you've never received anything from God. This Messiah you speak of, I am He. The first one was named Ramin. You were a woman of purity who was excited to be married. But he wasn't a good man. He hurt you. And it made you question marriage and even the practice of your faith.
Stop it.
The second was Farzad. On your wedding night, his skin smelled like oranges. And to this day, every time you pass by the oranges in the market, you feel guilty for leaving him. Because he was the only truly godly man you've been with. But you felt unworthy.
Why are you doing this?
I have not revealed myself to the public as the Messiah. You are the first. It would be good if you believed me.
You picked the wrong person.
I came to Samaria just to meet you. Do you think it's an accident that I'm here in the middle of the day?
I am rejected by others.
I know. But not by the Messiah.
And you know these things Because you are the Christ. I'm going to tell everyone.
I was counting on it.
Spirit and truth.
Spirit and truth.
It won't be all about mountains or temples.
Soon, just the heart.
You promise.
I promise.
This man told me everything I've done. Oh, he must be the Christ.
Thank you for joining us again, and really excited about this one. This episode, I think, raises an issue that I think a lot of Christians are confused about. What does it mean to be the Christ? What does it mean to be the Messiah? We kind of use Christ as if it's Jesus's last name, and of course that's not it, and really want to kind of dive into that a little bit. If you're looking for a key verse, it's John 4, verse 26. That's the verse or the scene that Jenkins is building off of with season 1, episode 8. And it says this: "Then Jesus declared, I, the one speaking to you, I am he." And this is the story. You can go read all of John 4. This is the story where Jesus meets the Samaritan woman at the well and introduces her to him as the Messiah. And actually, Jenkins says, or he portrays Jesus' revelation as the Christ being first to this woman. And surely that's how John portrays it as well, that this is the first time he just goes public, and you see that in the episode. And so what I want to do in this video, I want to first look at a few key terms that come up in this episode that I think are very, very important to draw out. And then we're going to do a little bit of commentary on the episode. I think there's some good parallels. There's some other parallels some may debate. I want to raise that, bring that out and just kind of raise that issue a little bit. And then we will close with some discussion questions. And so first, let's look at a few key terms, actually two key terms that I want to look at, or phrases. The first one is the Son of Man, the Son of Man. And this may have been, at least as portrayed by the gospel writers, this may have been the favorite of all that Jesus used to designate or to identify himself. He loved to call himself the Son of Man. I came along at a time when Son of Man was understood as a reference to the humanity of Jesus, and Son of God was a reference to his deity. And actually, both of those definitions have changed dramatically since I was in my 20s and I started taking the study of the Bible very seriously. There are many that consider Son of God to be a reference to deity. It definitely can be that. Psalm 2 is a sense of that, but also too, it's a reference to his authority or his coming kingdom. That is, he is the messianic king, and that's really the idea of Messiah. So when the New Testament authors use Son of God, they surely do have a sense of deity. So I'm definitely not dispelling that or dismissing that. I absolutely embrace that. But also, too, what should not be lost, the Son of God was the one who was designated to rule as king. That's very important because particularly in that time, not just in Israel, but even in the secular nations, such as Romans, the Greeks, the Babylonians, they saw the emperor or the king, the ruler, the Pharaoh, even in Egypt, as a son of God. That is, the fact that he's ruling signifies there's something a little bit more to him. He's more than just human. No, there's maybe some divinity there. And there's a sense that the Jews even had that in their understanding of the divine monarchy when God would bring in his kingdom that was promised through David, that his kingdom would endure forever. And so whoever this messianic figure would be, he would be the one that would rule as a divine king. He would be the one that would bring about his kingdom. But Son of Man is not just humanity. And yes, prophets such as Ezekiel, who uses it some 93 times. I think it's there. It's pretty obvious that it's a reference to him being a human being or humanity. It would seem that the way Jesus is using it is more a reference to Daniel 7, verses 13 and 14. Matter of fact, this is the text that he quotes in Matthew and Mark when he's finally delivered up to Pilate. And I'll read the Matthew quotation, which is Matthew 26 and 64. In responding to the Sanhedrin, he says this, "You have said so," Jesus replied, "but I say to all of you, from now on, you will see the Son of Man," there it is, "sitting on the right hand of the Mighty One, coming in the clouds of heaven." That's a direct quote from Daniel chapter 7, verses 13 through 14, where Daniel has this vision of this messianic, divine, kind of human figure that would be appointed or designated as the judge of the earth, the judge of all time. And Jesus here, when he stands before the Sanhedrin, not only in Matthew, but in Mark as well, makes the claim that he is that individual. Matter of fact, when he talks with his disciples in his Olivet discourse, his last discourse before he is turned over, has the Lord's Supper, before he's turned over to the authorities, he refers to himself as that Son of Man figure. That's exactly what he's referring to. And it is that statement where the Sanhedrin rulers respond, "We don't need any more witnesses. He's spoken blasphemy. Let's crucify him. Let's get rid of him." And so they perfectly understand that in that statement, Jesus is making a reference to a sense of deity. He's making a reference that he is this divine figure. He is the Messiah. And so that is a huge issue that actually I think is the linchpin that, they say, okay, it's time to get this guy crucified. The second figure is the Christ. And again, in the phrase Jesus Christ, Christ is not his last name. But Christ meant anointed one, the one chosen, the one who is the Messiah. And the disciples, along with the Samaritans, as depicted in this episode of The Chosen, really thought Messiah was a political Messiah. He's the one that's going to come and deliver us from the Roman occupation, the Roman oppression. But here, Jesus, particularly when he is used as the Messiah, he's that divine figure that will come and make the world the way it was supposed to be from the beginning. And here I want to kind of quote one of my favorite authors, Tim Keller, who really I think has a great description of the Messiah and the kingdom. He says, the Messiah has come when the world no longer needs justice or laws to govern it. It's completely unnecessary. That's how you know when the Messiah has come. And that's a great description, that the Messiah would bring in a world in which we won't need courts, we won't need justices, we won't need justice, we won't need protests, we won't need police officers or anything like that. Our hearts will be made right because of redemption. The world will be made right because of redemption. You won't need hospitals. Everything will be the way God intended from the beginning. And that's the sense of the Messiah. And it's during this Roman occupation that the Jews longed for the Messiah to rid themselves of the Roman occupiers and to give them a sense of independence. I don't know if they wanted the full sense of the kingdom, but they definitely believed that the Messiah would come to at least remove this Gentile yoke from their necks. He would come in and give them that independence again that they enjoyed before the exile with the Assyrians, or the exile with the Babylonians and Persians, or the period of independence they experienced under the Maccabees, which is about 150 years before the time of Christ. That's how they knew the Messiah would come. And there's a sense that they diminished what the true Messiah is. And here Jesus kind of restores it, that the Messiah comes bringing restoration. He brings healing. He puts back the hand of Satan in casting out demons. And so there's a sense of the Christ, that he's actually ushering in this kingdom in which will finally remake the world back into God's image and make it the way he intended from the beginning. Okay, let's turn to our second portion here, and let's look at the episode and just make a few passing comments or offer some commentary I really like the opening of this episode as it established Jacob, that cherished ancestor that would build the well. And there's a sense that Jenkins connects the well of Jacob to the well that the Samaritan woman would come to. And that well would be the well of the Samaritans. They identified that as their well. And of course, I'm sure there was some debate at that time as to whether or not that was Jacob's well. But I think there's a word here because Jesus is going to make a statement later on that just completely changes the dynamic and the discussion on this whole piece. There is a sense that monuments just really played a significant role in the religious life of the Jews. They knew the place where the Israelites crossed the Jordan. They knew the place where Jacob built his well. The Temple Mount became the place where Abraham would offer Isaac as a sacrifice. And so these monuments were very, very important. We're going to do a couple of trips back to Israel with the church and other churches. And I'm just fascinated how all the different monuments play into that entire pilgrimage experience back to Israel. And there may be something there, but Jesus makes this incredible statement in John chapter 4 that just revolutionizes everything. And I think it was an issue at the time that John writes this, and John's trying to get across to the early church. It's not the monument, but it's whether your heart has connected with God. And here's what he says in John 4, verse 23 and 4. Yet a time is coming, and it's now come, when the true worshipers will worship the Father in the Spirit and in truth, for they are the kind of worshipers the Father seeks. God is Spirit, and his worshipers must worship in the Spirit and in truth. In other words, what Jesus is saying, and Jenkins actually brings this out, it's not going to matter whether you worship in this mountain or whether you worship in Jerusalem or whether you worship at the church down the street or whether you worship at the church you grew up in. The question is, do you worship him in truth, the true revelation of who he is and the truthfulness of your heart? And do you worship him in the Spirit? In other words, is your heart completely dedicated to him? And are you being open and honest about your heart? That's what real worship is. And that's why I like this passage, because I think this whole revelation of Jesus, that I am he, that he is the Messiah, it is about worship. It is about how we approach God. Is it all about the liturgy? Is it about the right song? Is it about the right sermon? Is it about creating the right environment? Is it jumping through all the religious hoops that causes worship? And Jesus said, no. None of that matters. It's whether we understand and worship God for who he is. He's holy, he's righteous, he's gracious, he's merciful. He is to be honored. It's how we approach him. Do we approach him with a humble and a truthful heart? Are we honest? Do we confess our sins? Do we confess our brokenness? Do we come as we are and trust his Spirit to rebuild us? And then do we do it in the Spirit? In other words, are we sincere with our hearts and not trying to play these games or these negotiations with God? That's where true worship happens. And I like how the episode sought to kind of draw that out. And so that was really, really good. We see the Samaritan woman coming out to draw water, and obviously she does it out of shame. No one wants to come with her because she's been married 5 times and she's with another individual that's not her husband. Jesus will talk about that later. The issue of divorce comes up. And the way Jenkins portrays divorce in that culture is that it was an issue of finance. And that's very true. There was a contract, there were arrangements, there was an exchange of money between families. And yes, it's quite possible and was probably more probable that women were treated as property. There was a sense of asset. And so the fact that he did not want to give her a divorce, he would be losing his asset. And so she feels trapped. She feels that she's locked in. Now, there's a lot that goes with this. I'm of the personal opinion that sometimes we misapply some of the marriage and divorce texts because the times were different and marriage was more of a transaction to protect a certain class. That was the original intent, but it became something else, as I think Jenkins is trying to depict. But in the sense that Jenkins depicts the whole divorce marriage thing, there's a sense that yes, women were treated as property. But Jesus, when he comes, he completely levels the playing field, where there's no male or female. Not that there's a genderless kingdom. That's not what he's saying. But what he's saying is the sense of status in the kingdom is not based on gender. The sense of status in the kingdom is not based on ethnicity. You will hold your gender, you will hold your ethnicity, but that's not what determines whether or not one is close to God. And so I just thought that was interesting how he did that. And so then finally, the episode closes with Jesus meeting the woman at Jacob's well, and he raises the issue of living water. They have a conversation back and forth. There are glimpses of the conversation that you can trace to John chapter 4 in the scripture. Of course, Jenkins does take artistic and dramatic license to add a little flavoring and coloring to the conversation. Did it go that way? We're not sure. But again, he purposely says, look, I'm taking the dramatic and the artistic license to demonstrate that. But what I find interesting when he uses the living water, and particularly within the context that he is the Son of Man, this Messiah, I am he. We're going to come to that in a minute. It's in the context of worship. The living water, the well, it's become this sacred, hallowed place, a place of worship, a symbol of worship. And the point is, we all have a well. We all have a well. For the woman, the well were the men in her life. She's trying to make it through life. There was one or two men that were good to her. Now she's with one she can't stand. Trying to find that well. For some, maybe it's food. For some, it may be an addiction. Maybe it's alcohol. For some, it may be sex. For others, it may be family. For others, it may be children. The truth is, we make even church work a well. That somehow the work we do in the church that may have nothing to do with Christ is where we get our sense of fulfillment and our sense of satisfaction. And Jesus in that statement, particularly in John chapter 4, even in Jenkins' depiction of the text, of the story, is saying that, listen, it's only when you come worship me, which comes back to the phrase, I am he. It's only when you see who I am and you bow down to worship me, that's when you find fulfillment. That's when you find satisfaction. And it should be noted that in the passage that we open with, John 4:26, where he says, I am he. In the Greek, it's two words, ego eimi. That's a favorite phrase of John. It's a phrase he uses throughout with all the 7 I am statements. There's 7 I am statements that he uses in the Gospels of John. I am the bread of life. I am living water. There are a number of statements he uses. I am the door. Well, ego eimi is a hint. It's an echo to the I am that Moses met in Exodus chapter 3. And he's saying, look, I'm him. And in John 8:58, he's going to say, before Abraham was, I am. Same phrase that he uses here in John chapter 4, verse 24. It's a statement of deity, but it's more than just a doctrinal position. Don't miss this, because Christians take the deity of Christ and make it a doctrinal position. It's more of that. No, it's a call to worship. It is an invitation to find our satisfaction, to find our sense of purpose in him. Implication, there's nothing else on the planet that will satisfy the empty hole in my heart. It's only when I come and worship him and see him as the ultimate aim and purpose for living that my soul becomes a living water, a living well for others to drink from. That's the point. That's the Messiah. Okay, now we want to wrap this up with just a few discussion questions and reflection questions that can kind of take us deeper into John chapter 4. I want to encourage you again, if you haven't read the story, go back and read all of John chapter 4. That's where the story is found, where Jesus meets with the Samaritan woman, which I take to be a statement about worship. that the deity of Christ comes face to face with our need to worship him. And it's in our worship of him that we experience the fullness of life. We experience why and the why and the meaning of life, and our sense of brokenness is made whole. We find that he is the ultimate well, and there's no other water in the world that can quench our spiritual thirst. And just so a few questions that I want to throw out. What does the text, what does this episode in John chapter 4 say to you about worship? Are you a worshiper? And here I'm thinking personally as well as corporately. There's a call to personal worship, obviously, but also corporately. And something about when God's people come together and we worship God together and we worship him in spirit and truth, God's spirit descends in those worship spaces. And for a moment, we sense a sense of purpose, a sense of fulfillment, and everything is all right with the world. I take that what we understand theoretically in the text, we experience in worship. And the truth is, I can read all kinds of scriptures that can remind me mentally that I'm his child. But I'm telling you, my brothers and sisters, something supernatural happens when we worship him as a community and when we worship him personally. There's a sense that what I know mentally and theoretically or theologically becomes an experience in my heart. And that experience is something we desperately need that deepens our devotion to him. What are your thoughts about worship? Is worship our ultimate satisfaction, or are we running to other wells? What are the wells in your life? What are the places that you think springs with the spiritual water that will satisfy your life? I promise you, whatever struggle you have, whatever struggle I have, it's a well, and it's water that only agitates and actually thickens or makes our thirst even greater, I should say. And it's only Jesus that can quench our thirst. He's truly our Gatorade, right? And then finally, what are your thoughts about those living on the margins, or those whose beliefs are vastly different or even antithetical to Christian beliefs? And I think we're in a day where Christians are going into their silos. That if you don't believe exactly what I believe, I'll just go into my little silo until Jesus comes. That is not the way of Jesus. We can't be afraid to engage the world because somebody believes something differently. We can't even be afraid to engage other Christians because their Christian beliefs are a little bit different than ours. That's just not the way of Jesus. And we see this in this episode, and I think that's a good thing. And we see it throughout the scriptures. Paul says, I became like so many that I might win some. As Paul definitely ministered across Gentile lines, and he was willing to push the boundaries in order to share his faith and to share the love of God that lived and dwelled in him. And so that's all I have for today. I sure would love to hear your thoughts about this episode. I thought this was a very critical episode, very spiritual, but brings us back to what it means to see Jesus as Messiah, to see him as the one who says, I am he. I'd love to hear your thoughts. God bless you, and I'll be looking for you in the next video. Take care.